Hi, I'm Lacy. Welcome to Navigating Sustained Conflict, Coping, Grounding, and Finding a Sense of Control in a Divided Nation. 2020 has been an incredibly challenging year, and we're living in a really divided nation right now. On top of that, COVID has changed many of our daily lives and has put us in situations where lots of things are unfolding and changing all the time. And this has left many of us feeling powerless, feeling out of control, and unsure how to manage the intense and sustained chronic levels of stress and uncertainty that we're feeling. This training looks at giving you both concrete skills that you can use and implement, and also an understanding of why you're feeling some of the things that you're feeling from a neurobiological perspective. So, yes, you may obviously be thinking, well, I know why I feel stressed. This is happening or that is happening, but we'll look at helping you to understand even more about what is playing out in your nervous system and how having this information can change your relationship with what you're feeling. So we'll go ahead and get started. A quick introduction to who I am, and I'll just stop sharing for a moment. We'll go back in and out of PowerPoint. So I'm Lacy Alana. I'm the founder and lead trainer for Yes and Brain, and I work in several different domains. I'm a psychotherapist. I'm also a trainer who frequently works with corporations, nonprofits, and arts organizations to provide consultation and training on a wide range of topics. I'm a multidisciplinary artist as well, who works in the theater and circus realm. And a lot of the trainings that I provide blend elements from applied improvisation and business communication strategies with kind of underpinnings from both psychology and the relational neurosciences. So looking at how can we understand the brain to help us to better know why we do the things that we do, why we feel the way that we feel, and how to best navigate things accordingly. So today we'll be bringing a bit of all of those together, and I'll be explaining some of the things that you might be feeling from a nervous system perspective and help you to wrap your head around some concrete tools that you can use in accordance with what you're feeling. If you have questions in the future, feel free to reach out, yesandbrain.com, and I look forward to spending this time with you. Most of the time, my trainings are highly interactive, but since this is pre-recorded, it'll be a lot of me talking at you. Do feel free, please take care of yourself, pause when you need to, come back to this when it makes sense, and we will unfold from here. Here we go. So, the first thing that I want to invite you to do is check in with your body and what's happening in your body. And so, I want you to invite you to just take a moment and take a deep breath. Often, as we're living in this virtual world, and even before, but it looked a little bit different, we're rushing between things. We show up in a virtual meeting, we're kind of suddenly there, our screen is on, and we're supposed to be paying attention, and that one ends, and we do a couple of emails, and then we have to show up to our next thing. And there's not a lot of time given to being in touch with our bodies and checking in with where we are. This is something that's pretty common in all of Western culture, even when we're not virtual, but this certainly doesn't help things. And so I invite you to just kind of check in, like follow what feels right for your body. And I know you may be feeling kind of strange doing this as you're watching this, but I invite you to just sort of see what your shoulders need, follow kind of what your body is telling you that you need. Listening to your neck, your hands, checking in with kind of all the different parts of you. And if you notice resistance, that's okay. Be aware of that as well. A lot of doing this kind of work of navigating places of undefined spaces are about looking at what can I implement, but also noticing what your truths are and what you can do with those truths, because they are the things that are presenting themselves. And so I invite you during this training to kind of continue checking in with your body as I continue talking and sort of see where that tells you that you want to be. Maybe it's to change locations and to sit on a couch or sit on the floor and stretch, or to lay on your back somewhere. Or maybe it's that you want something to drink and you want to walk with me to the kitchen. Whatever it is, I invite you to follow those impulses because they are trying to tell you something. And so a couple of other pieces with this, I'm going to reshare my screen here. A couple of things to take away with this and why it's so important to be in our body is that our mind can be in the future worrying about what's going to come, or our minds can be in the past, worrying about what's happened, kind of ruminating about things, but our body can only be in the right now. And so if we can find our body, we can find the now. And so that's a pretty significant tool to be able to get back in our bodies and then get back where we are. And so holding on to this is super important. If you feel resistance to that, this is really normal, especially when we're highly stressed. So it's important to find movement that feels safe to you, whatever that is. And so that could be more traditional kind of working out or running or lifting weights or anything like that. It could be dancing around your kitchen with music on. It could be finding those moments of stretch. Whatever it is, it could just be doing tiny bits of movement. Whatever you can do to be in touch with your body and where things are and how they feel for you is super important. And I invite you to hold that awareness during our time together and also afterwards. Going back into my screen. So where we're going from here, number one is that we're going to bring the intrinsic to the extrinsic through brain science. I'm going to explain what this means. So this means the intrinsics, talking about the emotional experiences that we have unfold inside of ourselves. So the way that things, we feel body sensations in response to emotions, the way that our body kind of automatically does some responses to things that we encounter. Some of these things we're aware of, and some of them happen below the level of consciousness, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. But one of the things that can be really useful is to bring the things that are happening inside of us to the outside by understanding them better and by being able to label them. And so some of what I'm going to help you understand is a bit more about like, oh yeah, what is going on with our nervous systems? Like, how is that impacting you right now as you navigate through the world, and how you can take that information to better label the experiences that you're having. It's really common, especially when we're really stressed, to just feel like, wow, I'm just really stressed. And like, that's kind of where it stops, which is okay. But if we can start to recognize like, oh, okay, I'm feeling this thing, and that's like my nervous system connected to this other thing, and it makes sense that I'm having that, and also these other things. There's more richness to that, and it enables us to do more with that information. And so we're going to be looking at that. Number two, we're going to look at grounding into the now and some of the tools that you can take with you for later as well. Number three, we're going to explore some creative pathways for regulation. And then number four, go through tips, tricks, and tools to cope and navigate the hard conversations and hard realities of now. So that's a little bit about where we are headed together today. So with this, we're going to jump into the idea of neuroception. And what this means is it's a concept that can help you understand something that's playing out below your level of conscious awareness. So how this works is that our autonomic nervous system completes many tasks that operate below our level of awareness all the time. So this is the part of you that's responsible for ensuring that you're breathing, that your heart is beating, that you have some responses ready to go that you don't require you to think about them. And our brain is constantly scanning the environment, looking to gather information about what's going on. And we react subconsciously to the things that we encounter. And from there, we craft the story to explain what we feel. And so my favorite example of this that I pretty much always use is when you get startled. So you're walking through your apartment complex, someone comes around the corner that you weren't expecting to see. Your body responds with the reality of startled without your brain having to instruct it to do that, right? So you encounter that person, maybe your eyes go wide, your hands might even go up, your heart starts beating faster, maybe you get sweaty, you might feel the pin prickles on your skin, whatever it is, of course, depending on how startled you are, right? Is it in the morning when people are walking around versus like at night when you didn't hear someone? And so your body does that startled reaction without you having to say, hey, brain, could you please initiate the startled response? Yeah. And so from there, once you've had that response, your brain then makes the story, the cognitive part of your brain, the thinking part, makes the story to explain the sensations that you had, right? And so there's a huge part of our brain that's taking in information all the time from the world around us and reacting to it below our level of consciousness. And in the example of being startled, it's going to be really clear that your brain's going to need to make up sort of the correlating story and explanation behind that. Your brain's going to go, oh yeah, that was hard to miss. But there are things that our brain is picking up on and responding lower than our level of consciousness all the time that are less obvious, that we may not notice, like, oh, I'm making the story about this, but we're accumulating experiences that reinforce, is this a stressful thing? Is this not a stressful thing? How do I feel here, etc. And so this concept's super important to just keep in mind, that our brain is always, always, always scanning the environment around us. One of the reasons that this is really important in the context of our political landscape, in the context of COVID, is that our brain is always looking for danger, because that's the brain's biggest job, is to detect danger and keep us safe. And so in the world we're in now, open any internet, any news source, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, and you're going to see an inundation of news stories about politics, news stories about COVID, things that are not communicating safety to you and to all of us. And so our brain is constantly picking up on those realities and responding to them below our level of consciousness, which is part of the reason that we feel this kind of low level, pervasive, often stress, or you may be feeling that exhaustion or that fatigue, because your brain is just exhausted from all the time picking up on these stresses and acting on those. So we're going to look a lot more at these brain science pieces as we go. I'm going to share my screen here with you. So another thing that's super important to note is that everyone's response pattern and natural response tendencies are going to vary based on their previous experiences, based on their understanding of the world, based on stuff that they find triggering and unsettling versus not. And that means some people may be moving into a place where they're feeling collapse and shut down. So this is if you're feeling just like, oh my gosh, I can't get out of bed and I'm exhausted and like time is disappearing and what's happening, I don't even know. Other people may go into overactivation. So they feel some of the stress and their nervous system says to them, essentially, not in direct words, but says, hey, let's do everything that we can to control the things that we can't control. And so I'm going to do this and this and this and this and this. And they maybe get over busy. And sometimes we can end up in mixed states, which can be both kind of the roller coaster up and down between these two, or even states where both of them are kind of happening at the same time, which can be really intense. And so, as I mentioned, a lot of the responses that we have are based on old patterning and schemas that we hold based on how we understand the world. So for example, this idea of if someone as a child gets told repeatedly, hey, you're worthless, then that person's going to believe, hey, I'm worthless, right? And you could tell them all day long later in life, like that's not true, but they're going to have deep internal patterning reinforcing things that they know. And so the ways that we respond to cues that are giving us a sense of lack of safety or unsafety or uncertainty are going to be based in experiences that you've had before. So this can go two ways. If you're a person who's navigated a lot of high level stress, this could mean that your system has kind of a trigger response and is like, sees that coming and reacts in a big way. Or it could mean that your system is like, meh, no big deal. Like, I know what to do with that. Or that it reacts with shutdown or mobilization. Or if you haven't experienced a lot of things, this could be a whole new level of sort of being immersed in intensity, which could be causing a different type of reaction. Other things about our responses that are important, they're automatic. So they're things that are happening below our level of consciousness that you're not thinking about. We can, however, change both the way that we respond to things and our stories and understandings about the responses we're having. And that's some of what we'll look at today, is both how can we bring more regulation proactively into those automatic responses, and what can we do to redefine, re-understand, and retell the story of what's happening. Yeah. The responses that you have are generally things that kept you safe. And maybe that means physical safety, but it could also be felt or psychological safety. And so if you're a person who tends to shut down, then that has served you in some way in the past. And if you're a person who tends to go into activation mode, then that also served you in the past in some capacity. So that can be interesting stuff to look at. And the responses that we have are important to name and label. Like I talked about, bringing the intrinsic to the extrinsic is a really useful tool. One of the concepts I talk about a lot is this idea of looking for the side door. Many of us can list, oh, here's a bunch of coping skills, here are things that I can do or should do when I'm stressed, etc. But it can be really hard to activate those things and to use them and put them into place when we're feeling really stressed. And the reason is because there's a disconnect between our cognitive brain knowing, oh, I should do this, and the felt senses in the lower brain and some of the automatic responses that are like, yeah, but the world is not safe right now. And so a lot of the tools we're going to look at today are this idea of coming in the side door. We're trying to look for, what does my brain need? It needs regulation, it needs grounding, it needs connection and tethering that can combat some of the messaging it's getting that the world is on fire. And some of these tools we're going to look at is coming through the side door. Okay. So, the first pathway to regulation we're going to look at is rooting into what you do know. So, when we're in a place where there's a ton that we don't know, and we don't know how something is going to play out, and we don't know what's going to happen, and there's lots of uncertainty, it can be really grounding to root into what we do know. And this can feel complicated because many of us may be in places of upheaval where things that used to be more stable aren't as much anymore. The way that you see your friends has changed. Maybe your job stability has changed, or the pathway that you were on professionally is no longer a thing that exists, etc. And so, what we want to think about is reviewing your own stories and swapping stories with other, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a moment, that connect you to things that you do know about who you are. So, things that can be really useful, looking back at old memories that are fun and that felt good, going back through old vacation photos or visits or trips with friends, sharing those photos and stories with other people, calling family if you're connected to your family, and talking about a fun or funny memory that you have. These are things that can really help us to know who I am. Additionally, naming more externally than you normally might, like, what are the things that you're doing that are rooted into facts that you know about yourself? So, for example, if you sit down to read, because that's something you like to do, then saying, like, man, I've always been someone who loves to read. That can feel obvious, or like, well, I already know that. Why would I say that, or like mark that to myself? But our brain is looking for information that it can hold on to and connect to when we're in these types of places. And so embedding yourself in facts that you know about yourself can be really useful. And naming those things throughout the day can be something you can actively do to support your brain in marking kind of the antithesis of the barrage of information we're getting right now that's stressful. Connected to this, pathway number 2 to regulation is connection. So our brains are wired to be socially engaged and connected with other people. Like, we're wired for co-regulation. We're wired to seek and want to be connected to others. And so looking for ways to sustain this right now. And I want to preface this by saying that right now it can also sometimes feel exhausting to feel socially connected, or it's like, oh, I want to hang out with those people, but I don't want to commit to something right now, or I don't know, I just feel exhausted. Like, that sounds good, but I'm just tired and overwhelmed. And so sometimes looking for new ways to make that connection can be really useful. So we're going to talk about this and talk about what it means to recreate some of the natural relaxed moments we used to have with people. I think some of what makes it so exhausting is partially just that we're all exhausted. So everything's a little more exhausting. But also because we used to just be able to kind of meet up with friends and like hang out on someone's couch or just sort of enjoy shared space. And we can't do that in the same way anymore. And so it feels like, oh, okay, I'm like committing to turn myself on to show up for a thing. And that's a really different thing than just being with someone. So I'll give you some ideas for that in a moment. The second is that it can be really hard to escape kind of perpetually talking about just politics or just COVID. And so part of what I like to do is invite kind of new realities of naming the truth that we're facing and new ways to make an initial connection. So it's really common you see someone, oh, hi, how are you? And maybe you want to share that information with some people, but some of that's just a social nicety. But right now, a lot of times that can feel complicated to answer. People are like, well, I'm COVID fine, I guess. Like, I don't know. And so looking for new ways to invite kind of real dialogue and real connection to other people. Um, some ideas here can be kind of fun and funny to ask, like, yeah, any new unexpected coping skills show up for you? Just kind of naming the reality of what's happened. Anything unexpected happen in the last few weeks, connect with a friend, have a project go well, learn something cool. What's been on your mind recently, both good and bad, or things that you've learned, just inviting people to share. Are you looking forward to anything right now? Sometimes that may feel overwhelming because people are like, actually, I don't know. Everything feels really intense. Even if it's just a good night of sleep. What are the truths that you're bringing with you today, which we'll talk a little bit more about multitudes in a little bit, or connecting something that you know about that person to something else. So for example, like, oh, I was thinking about you the other day. I saw this post about whatever that made me think about the time that you XYZ. Do you still do XYZ? Right. So just looking for new ways to bridge some of these connections. A couple of takeaways from this is that both pathway 1 and 2 is that connectivity to ourselves and others can really bring soothing to our nervous system. When we're able to root into what we do know, it gives us kind of a way to combat all the things that we don't know. The world is shifting so much, and leaning into these points of clarity can be incredibly useful. And remember that connectivity in the normal way isn't always working right now, and we have to seek alternatives to that reality. And so what that looks like, a couple of different ways, things to do. Like I mentioned, look at pictures that connect to happy times, revisit, tell old stories, and then aim for things that fall into the virtual normal. So things that can be connective building, but that meet the level of capacity that you have, and that also acknowledge that things are kind of weird right now. Things that I've done that feel nice and a little more normal in our current reality is I've cooked a meal virtually with a friend. You can pick the same recipe and just each make it and leave your computer, your laptop up and chat while you do it, or cook your own respective meals and then eat together afterwards. Going on a phone walk together. So friends that live in different cities, I'll go on a walk, they'll go on a walk. We'll talk on the phone while we do it. Sending cards, playing a virtual game. Food delivery can be kind of nice and fun. For a couple weekends ago, a friend made some food and delivered it in kind of a sequence of houses, and we all got to anticipate that person arriving and sort of share in the joy of having this collective meal together. So looking for things that feel good to you and reflecting on, like, oh yeah, like, what is the thing that I liked most about the connectivity I had with friends before? What were the things I like to do the most? And can I do that now? If that was, oh, I'd like to go to concerts with my friends. Obviously you can't do that right now. But are there ways where you can find an event or something, some of the virtual shows that are happening, and all buy tickets together and attend that and maybe watch together while also having another Zoom call open where you can chat or something like this, right? So looking at what did I previously like and how can I harness and use those things now? A couple of other pathways here that we're going to talk about. Pathway to regulation number 3, creative visualization. And I'm going to unshare for a moment and talk about the world's most relaxing place and this power of yes and. So in improv, one of the tools that improvisers use to co-create together is that somebody suggests an idea, somebody else says yes and, adds on something, and that kind of goes in repeat forever. There's this yes and cycle to that. And we can play this with other people and use this tool, or we can do this by ourselves. And one of the things that I really like to do is to create the world's most relaxing place or the world's most fun place or the world's best Saturday with either you or someone else. So someone says, oh, the most relaxing place would be a beach. And someone's like, oh yeah. And like the breeze is perfect. And someone else says like, yeah, and you can just like hear the seagulls, but they're at a distance and like there's no risk of being pooped on. And someone else is like, yeah, and the waves are crashing and it just like smells like good saltiness, right? And so you're co-creating and establishing this really wonderful, relaxed space. And that can be something that you later use when you're stressed to just imagine like, oh, I'm going to go to that place that I've established. It's something you can use with other people in a moment of tension of like, hey, let's take a break and go to the beach for a minute. Or you can use that tool yourself, like as you're wanting to think of a relaxing place. This may be something that you've done or thought about in response to like highly anxious moments or traumatic moments or a panic attack moment, etc. But doing these things proactively can be a great tool for our brains. So a lot of times we end up kind of reactively coping, like something comes up and we look at like, okay, how can I sort of put out this fire that's presenting itself? But right now, because we're experiencing so much ongoing chronic stress and fatigue, looking at proactive ways that you can add more security and safety and give your brain moments of this connectivity, of rooting into what you know, of creative visualization, that's going to help combat some of the overall stress that you're feeling. Because if we're feeling incredibly stressed, our ability to handle stressors when they come up is so much lower. So if we're kind of already like an 8 out of 10 on the stress scale, if something comes up and bumps us to a 9, that's huge and we're super stressed. Whereas if we're a 4 out of 10 on the stress scale and something bumps us up a point, 5 out of 10, still not great, but not catastrophic, right? And so what we're looking at are things that you can implement to just lower the baseline all the time of stress. And so using this concept of the world's most relaxing place can be something useful you can take with you around visualization. So think about, what are the places that I love the most or that feel most relaxing to me? Think about the 5 senses and what you might feel or notice there. And can you create those with someone else, or can you create those with yourself? And even before you're in a state of stress, how can you use those as something you can resource into? So a couple of takeaways with this, mostly I've already talked about it, but this idea of sending your brain active signals of safety to build that felt safety, can practice it with self or others. And this can be a less threatening way to engage in grounding and meditation for an activated system. So when we're super stressed, sometimes the act of being still. So if you've tried meditation and failed, or maybe it used to work for you, but isn't right now, it makes a lot of sense, because when we're really stressed, when we're really activated, being able to be still can feel like a vulnerability, because our system is used to mobilizing to keep ourselves safe. And if we're just sort of sitting and not doing anything, our nervous system is like, wait, why are you not like addressing the intensity of all the things around you? Like, don't just sit here like a lame duck. Like, what are you doing? When really we are trying to help our nervous system, but our nervous system is in such a survival state that it's not understanding that or picking up those cues or those messages. And so this can be a way that you can kind of come in that side door towards something that's grounding, towards something that's meditative, but that doesn't threaten some of your system's tools in stability right now. So it's all about looking at these creative ways that we can give our brain what it actually ultimately needs. And so a couple of other notes about the brain, some of which I've already talked a little bit about, but a few super key things is that our brain's number one task is keeping us alive. And on top of that, keeping us alive with burning as little energy, calories as possible. And so what this means is that the brain is scanning the environment for risk all the time, like we talked about, and the brain will eventually stop scanning and divert resources if the scanning is no longer helping us. So for example, your brain is generally scanning and looking for, where's an area of unsafety. If over and over and over again, the message your brain is picking up is, yeah, it's not safe, mobilize, then eventually your brain is like, okay, every time I scan, I'm getting the same message. So I'm going to not scan anymore because that's not a good use of my resources. And I'm going to put all of my energy towards the stability and the mobilization against the danger that we're currently constantly in. So this is adaptive and this is a survival instinct, but it also means that when we are in a world of perpetual or chronic stress, so things that are happening right now with COVID, with living in this divided nation that we're in, the political news that can be really stressful, is that the brain is like, okay, we're just in a threat situation. Like it's crisis. So go ahead and immobilize and get either stuck or get stuck in overactivation, which is part of the reason that many of us are either feeling this exhaustion and kind of lackluster, like, I don't care about anything, like nothing matters, I'm not motivated, all these things, or you may feel burnt out and kind of overactivated, is because our brain is exhausted, but it's also locked in this state of we're in crisis. And so we want to look for things that actively combat and send other messages to our brain so that our brain is like, wait a minute, I guess this is not a crisis bad thing. This thing isn't attacking me. So that's good. Maybe I can lower my defenses a little bit, right? And so with that, pathway to regulation number 4 is creative grounding and meditation, which we talked a little bit already with this idea of yes and, but I want to give you some other tools that you can use with you because, like I mentioned, some of the things that you may have traditionally done or thought about trying, or that people are telling you to try, oh, meditate, do deep breathing, can feel really hard when we're in an activated state. And so as I talk about these next different tools that you can use, I invite you again to check in with your body like we did at the beginning of the training. So find a little bit of stretch, check in with your breath. You may notice that like, oh, I've been holding my breath. Like I should take a deep breath, like notice, like, how does your chest feel? How does your head feel? Like, what are things feeling like for you right now? Okay, so I invite you to continue doing that as I talk through these. So some tools that you can use that are a little bit more kind of active rather than just the like, sit and try to clear your head or mark your thoughts are these tools. So name 20 things around you. So especially when we get sort of stuck or immobilized, we can end up with this like tunnel vision where we just get a little bit like disassociated and connected. And like you may even feel sort of like things are tunneling in. And maybe you're not literally sitting and staring at the place, but it can be really hard to be plugged into the environment. And so name 20 things around you with the intention of also changing the directions you're looking. So make sure you look left, okay, I can see a jean jacket that I'm mending. Look up, I can see a plant that I have that needs to be watered. I look to the right, I can see a picture of oranges. I look behind me, I can see this, right? So looking kind of all the different directions and noticing what you can notice. Going on a walk and challenging yourself to name and see 10 or however many new things on the walk, right? So like I walk one of the same pathways to my favorite coffee shop in my neighborhood quite regularly. But when I do these and challenge myself to notice something new, it doesn't have to be something like drastic and huge. It's just like, oh, I never noticed that like that neighbor has a wind chime hanging on their front porch. It's like, oh, I never noticed that that balcony paint is chipping but used to be yellow. Huh, right? So it doesn't need to be anything wildly huge, just looking around, challenging your brain to hunt for these new things. Similarly, naming things in alphabetical order, which can be done in your office or your house or wherever, or on a walk. So challenge yourself, find something that starts with A, find something that starts with B, find something that starts with C. It's actually a lot harder than it seems like it would be. So take that for what you will. Same thing, naming things by color order, like with rainbow. What do you see that's red, orange, yellow, green, blue, etc. Repeat. Or name as many things as you can that insert the rest of the sentence here. So name as many things in your space that are blue as you can, right? So it's like, oh, I've got the journal. I've got that on my storage box. I've got it on the pom-poms on my window. I've got all those books, right? So just going through and noticing these things. And it's not that you didn't know these things are here before, but it's awakening your brain to the space around you and grounding into where am I, right? When we can't necessarily access like, oh yeah, find the like calm meditative state, because that may feel like a vulnerability for your body or your system. We can look at what are other ways that I can give myself awareness and connection with the world around me. A couple of takeaways from this, many of which I talked about. When our bodies are on high alert, normal quote unquote meditation may feel unsafe. And it may not even be a like, oh, I'm actually physically unsafe, but just feels unsafe. Anything that brings your attention into the now is useful. So, this idea again of if we can get into the now, we refine presence. And so sometimes being in our body can also feel like a huge threat and not safe when we're really activated. And so looking for places and ways that we can find presence is super important and key. Looking for alternative tools, right? I also note here that sometimes escapism and distraction are what we need. So, the scrolling on Instagram, the rating of Reddit, whatever, but always trying to come back to grounded now is super important. It can be really easy when we're in this activated state to be just exhausted and fatigued and feel like, well, maybe I'm doing self-care by watching this Netflix show, the 18th one in a row, question mark. And sometimes it is what we need. But most of the time, if you're finding like, well, I don't really like feel better or good doing that, then my guess is that you're not actually meeting the need that your brain has. Like you're giving it some rest, and rest is good, but that it's looking for soothing and regulation, which isn't coming from the Netflix show. Maybe you're only getting the resting and the stillness, which is still good, but looking for ways that you can provide active soothing, regulation, and grounding. Other things, avoid doom scrolling or the passive melt, which I just talked about, the passive melt, but avoiding sort of the doom scrolling that's really tempting right now. Part of why it's so tempting is that our brain is looking for information. It's trying to make sense of what's happening around us. And so our brain is looking like, okay, well, if I read this thing, maybe I can seek understanding. Maybe I can have an answer. Maybe then I'll feel organized and like things are okay. But the reality is that we're not going to get that from news stories, because it isn't just one thing that's happened. And that's also not how news stories are written. They're written to be sensational. And even if we get one little nugget of information, there's so many things happening in the world that it doesn't really address the longevity or the complexity of what we're navigating in this divided nation. A couple of other tools and things that we're going to keep in mind. I'm going to give you a specific exercise. And this exercise is called, If That Is True, What Else Is True? And the goal of this exercise is bringing our awareness to the concept of multitudes and holding more than one thing. So when we're stressed, our vision tends to get really narrow and really stuck, and we have a hard time holding these realities of I can both be really stressed and overwhelmed, and there can be bad things happening, and I can also find this moment of enjoyment. And that's also a thing that's real and true. Like our brain is looking for like, wait, I need to allocate the resources in the best way possible. And if there's a stress or a threat, like that's the thing I need to put my energy towards. And so one of the ways that we can help our brain when it's in this situation is that we can't always like talk our brain into the sort of quote unquote reasonable thing, right? Like you've been in that state where you're like, well, I'm stressed and I know that like I shouldn't feel this way. And yet you do. And like telling yourself that doesn't actually resolve anything, right? And it's because of a disconnect between lower and upper brain, which we'll talk a little bit about. But one of the ways that we can help our cognitive brain when we can't just kind of quote unquote talk ourselves into something is that we can give our brain exercises that help it strengthen the thing that it needs, right? So if we're recognizing, okay, my brain right now is stuck and not very flexible and is overly focusing on the bad things, and that's all it's seeing, then we can look at like, okay, what are the tools or ways that I can give my brain a chance to experience the antithesis of that? And we can give our brain that, even if it's not about the stressful thing that we're navigating or thinking about. So for example, if you were going to do this exercise with yourself or with someone else, you would start with a fact or a statement of some kind, and then a follow-up of, if that's true, what else is true? So my favorite example to start with is that a statement of baby kittens are often really fluffy. Okay. So if that's true, what else is true? Probably that people really like to pet them. Okay. If that's true, what else is true? Probably that some people don't like to pet them because not everyone likes the same thing. Okay, if that's true, what else is true? That those people might prefer a different type of animal or creature. Okay, if that's true, what else is true? Then there's a lot of variety in things that people like. Okay, if that's true, what else is true, etc. Right? So this isn't about the divided nation. This isn't about COVID. This isn't about those pieces directly, but we're opening our brain up to think about, wait, what are all the other things here that I'm not holding on because my brain has gone into this narrow survival place, right? So we're looking at those pieces a bit more. So this can be really useful to just do in general, to do also kind of for fun, to do on a walk. This can also be kind of grounding or meditative. This can be a nice car activity. It can also sort of stimulate things cognitively. So it can also be a good distraction. And sometimes you'll find that, like, oh, I thought I wasn't expecting to go here. I didn't see these things connected. And now they have. And it's just giving your brain pathways to see that there might be more that's wider than how you're conceptualizing it right now, right? So I've talked about most of these, breaking out of this tunnel vision. So looking for things that support the regulated brain story. So when your brain's regulated, you're probably likely to see, like, oh yeah, there's complexity, and like some people feel this way, and like I feel this way, and like that doesn't mean, like, all those things are true. Like, we're holding multitudes, we're holding more than one thing. And so exploring, what are my truths right now? And it can be really hard right now because we can feel the tendency to narrow in and to have the truth be, well, everything's the worst, or I'm struggling, when a lot of times there are some complex dualities and layers, right? So it may be that I am both struggling and had a really great phone call with my friend yesterday. It can be, I feel really disconnected and I talked to this person and that was really nice, right? It can be all of these things that exist together, and helping our brain know those things can be something that we can do to help break our brain out of that narrow tunnel vision that it may have. Yeah. Another pathway to regulation, utilize upper and lower brain regulation. So when I'm talking about this, what I'm talking about is that the lower brain, and this is all going to be simplified because we don't have time for a full neuro lesson. But the lower brain largely reacts automatically, can't be talked into regulation, and focuses on survival. This part of our brain is the part that, when we're chronically stressed, when we're facing over and over and over again stressful things, the lower brain is really activated and it will demand our attention until we acknowledge it, right? So this is the part of you that's really stressed and you're like, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to think about that. And like, it's going to get your attention by making you collapse or get sick or sit down or feel so much anxiety that you can't not pay attention to it. And again, this is rooted in survival, right? Your lower brain is like, hello, I'm doing you a favor and keeping you alive. And if you're ignoring me, you dummy, I'm going to do something so that you have to pay attention to me because I am keeping you safe right now, right? And so that's what our lower brain largely is doing. The upper brain, largely oversimplified, is the more cognitive part of our brain, the sort of thinking, quote unquote, higher level problem solving, executive functioning kind of brain. And so what this means is that when our lower brain is dysregulated, which most of us to some degree are now with this chronic stress and pathway, it needs proprioceptive and kinesthetic regulation. It needs a felt sense of safety. And when I'm talking about proprioceptive and kinesthetic, I'm talking about, largely, again, summarized, but getting physical movement in, getting kind of where our body is in space, getting to have those types of feelings with ourselves. As we're sending the feelings of felt safety, a lot of that comes back to the basic soothing things and the things that we find comforting. So this is the place where, you want to curl up under the blanket with your favorite hot tea and watch your favorite movie and be really gentle and put lotion on and take care of yourself and do the things that maybe felt best to you when you were younger that were soothing. And there's a reason biologically that a lot of the bottom up soothing and regulation we need is rooted in play and movement. And this goes a little further than we're going today, but these ideas of the earliest soothing that we all experienced is in our mother's womb. So we were kind of swaying in the slushy gushy and finding that gentle movement and hearing the voices and just getting to be kind of in this peaceful space. When we're born, assuming that you had responsive caregivers, you were rocked, you were swayed. These feelings of movement were things that helped orient your brain. So if you like rocking now, if you have access to a park with a swing, all of these things are things that you can do to send support to your lower brain. Yeah. So the upper brain, this is the problem solving, planning action, complex, goes offline when we're in crisis mode. So that part of our brain doesn't get the resources and energy when we're really stressed, which is why when we're really stressed, we have to be able to address the lower brain stress needs so that we can think logically again. And this is super important because I know that we're not talking about this political thing happening or that political thing happening. But a lot of us being able to navigate this space is really about us staying regulated and addressing and understanding the realities of what's playing out for us so that we can take action in a way that works for us or soothes us. And so it's not that you can't harness the strength of your top brain, your upper brain, and kind of do the top down regulation, but it's holding on to the fact that top down won't be sufficient if you're drastically dysregulated in your lower brain, because you can't talk your lower brain into feeling safe. That's not really something that's accessible. But you can use the parts of your upper brain that you can harness to hold on to tools that sort of your capable thinking adult self may know, like, okay, this will make my brain feel soothed. This will make my brain feel comfortable. So these are the places where you can do the top down by knowing and kind of reparenting yourself of like, okay, I'm going to set myself up with the favorite movie, with the tea, with the whatever feels good, right? Or doing some of these exercises around exploring multitudes or creating the safe spaces. Those are ways you're using your upper brain to support your lower brain in regulation. Another pathway to regulation, the idea of containment. And what I mean by this is that when we're in a world where everything's unfolding all the time, it's all super intense, we're largely really flooded by all the information we're taking in, which can be incredibly overwhelming. And so we want to avoid full and sudden immersion. So staying informed, but knowing your limits also. So this is things like, I want to put a container around how much news I'm consuming, because when I start scrolling, my brain thinks it's looking for or doing me a favor by seeking facts to help me, things feel out of control. Let me get back control by understanding the facts. But really, it's not giving us that and actually doing that. So knowing like, okay, like what is actually a healthy amount for me to read the news or scroll the news, right? How much of that can I do that's actually useful? And this isn't always an easy thing to find because we want to know what's happening, but consider setting a timer on your phone or a phone alarm of like, okay, I'm going to read 10 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes in the afternoon and 10 minutes at dinner, or like whatever feels right for you. Or maybe I'm going to subscribe to a digest from a news source that I trust to get, an update daily of the biggest stories that I should know. So looking for ways that you can provide containment around exposure and things that you're experiencing. So with this, another pathway to regulation that we're going to talk about is the idea of boundaries. Some of this we just talked about in terms of yourself. So boundaries with you around how am I going to spend my time? Where am I going to let that go? Am I going to set some limits around what I know does or doesn't work for me? And the other big piece of this, of course, is boundaries with others. This can be an incredibly challenging time to share space with folks who have really different ideological views than you have. And so a lot can come up around that. And a tool that I like to use around this, I'll break down a little bit. And of course, there's tons more about navigating hard conversations and all of these pieces, is identifying the task with. So this seems really simple, but going through the people that you interact with in the day and recognizing like, okay, what's the task I have with them? Like, what's my part of that? What's their part of that? So this can be really simple. Like, okay, my task with the grocery store checkout person is, their task is to like scan my groceries reasonably efficiently. And my task is to pay them, get the groceries, load the car, get them home, unload them, right? My task with my boss might look something different, my task with my sibling, my parents, etc. The reason that this is helpful is that it can help us ground into like, oh, wait, what am I actually wanting to do or needing to do with this person? So if you find yourself, for example, in a workplace situation where someone has a really different view than you, and that's coming up in the work environment, assuming that you don't work somewhere where that's like central to what you're doing. So like you don't work for a political something where that's part of it, then chances are good that the task that you have with the administrative assistant at your office isn't to discuss politics. Doesn't mean you can't choose not to, but having that may help you orient into like, wait, what are the boundaries I want to have with this person? So with this, recognizing that it can be really triggering and really activating right now to share space with people that don't share your ideological beliefs. And this can be really triggering in feelings of unsafety. And that can be really hard to hold. And there may be times, of course, where you choose to not have someone in your life. So you no longer talk to your aunt, whoever, because of disagreements about whatever. But there may be times where you don't have that choice, or now is not the time to make that choice, etc. And so sometimes focusing in on the task that we have with someone that we can't make those kinds of choices with can be useful, right? So, okay, my task with this administrative assistant is to do this thing. And this can help us set boundaries and separate our emotions from the objectives. And this isn't to say at all, like, hey, you believe in this thing, stop talking about that with these people because it's important to you and you want to advocate for that, right? And that's not the objective. It's just bringing some intention and awareness to how is being with this person impacting me? How is that helping me harness the brain state that I want to or not in my interactions? And where do I want to give my power and control, right? Because you may find yourself thinking, well, I want to advocate for the thing that I believe in, and that's good. And if you find yourself locked in something with someone at work, for example, that's like, wait, I didn't choose to be in this conversation, but you said this thing and that's really hard, then that's going to take some of your resources, which means that may take resources away from another place that you might want more ideally to do your activism. There's no right or wrong place to do those things. And there's certainly nothing wrong with choosing, assuming that things are okay at work and whatnot, of having that conversation with someone. But when we're in a reactive state or we're feeling unsafe, sometimes we're not the best at protecting our own resources. And so the goal of this is not, hey, just stop having these conversations. It is being mindful about when am I having these conversations and how can I control the resources that I'm expending so that I can make sure that I'm putting my resources when I have them towards the place that I want that's going to affect the most change, right? So asking, what's my task with this person? What's coming up for me neuroceptively from this person? So am I having a strong reaction kind of like, oh, this person makes me feel unsafe and that makes me respond this way? How can I meet the emotional needs there? So if I'm feeling like, oh, I feel unsafe with this person and I'm noticing that makes me feel XYZ thing, what boundaries do I need to set to complete the task with them that I have? And where do I want to channel my change or advocacy energy? Is it towards this person? Is it somewhere else? And if it's somewhere else, how can I redirect us back to the task? Or even if it is towards this person, how can I ensure that the task I have to do with this person is something that we can still do? And I can approach this in a way that I get to lead a little bit rather than, oh, this person makes me feel unsafe and brought this thing up at work. And now I feel like I have to respond and I'm stuck in this thing when really I just want to like make the copy I need to make, right? So just thinking about these different pieces. There will be times I want to name where the task and the boundaries are at odds. So for example, you and your mother have really different ideological beliefs, and the task with her may be like, the connection, typical mother-child things, but maybe the way that she brings up or expresses whatever it is impacts your ability to complete the task of connection or support. In which case, there's a lot more to kind of evaluate and look at in terms of like, what does that mean for our relationship and what do we want, right? A couple of other things to note: self-protection and holding boundaries is key. People don't always like it when we do that and will often push against it, but it is super important. Also holding that we can't make someone change, but if we change a pattern of interaction or we provide new information, it does invite the system to change, right? The way that it's operating right now, and systems are often resistant to change. But just as kind of a nugget of thinking about how can I control the boundaries around this with other people, thinking about like, wait a minute, I don't want you to be able to sweep me off my feet. If I want to have this conversation with you, I want to initiate it in a way that works for me. And I want to set boundaries around this, right? So in summary, things to do: normalize what you're feeling with the brain science. So put markers on, oh, my nervous system is totally fried. Neuroceptively, I'm picking up on danger all the time. That's super intense. Of course, I'm exhausted. Find connection. Look for who are the people in your life that you feel connected to or have felt connected to. It doesn't even need to be like, oh, this is my best friend, from wherever, but like, oh yeah, that was a cool person that I just matched with on LinkedIn. We went to college together. Hey, remember that time that professor somebody did the whatever, right? Like just little moments that feel real. Seeking fun to support the lower brain regulation and nervous system and movement as well. So looking for what are the things that bring you some joy? A good clue for this can be rooting back into things you know from childhood. So it's like if your best day was like going to the park and flying a kite and tossing a frisbee, then get yourself a frisbee, get yourself a kite, go do that, right? Find these moments of play and moments to tap into what felt good for you. Setting and holding boundaries with others. So recognizing, how do I want to interact with this person? When do I want to? And what do I want it to be about? And knowing that you're absolutely entitled to protect your system. Limit time doom scrolling. So consider setting alarms, looking at like what works for me, what doesn't work for me. Focusing on proactive restoration, coping, and grounding rather than reactive collapse. A lot of times we wait until we're in, the intensest moment of crisis to be like, oh, I should get myself some help here. The problem is now we've been in such a sustained perpetual crisis that our brain really needs us to start combating that with signals of safety. So look for ways to send actively those cues of safety. Music, old music that you used to love during a happy time or that's connected to a good memory, reviewing old memories, looking back at old photos, whatever feels good to you. Other things to hold on to: soothe the brain before using cognitive strategies, right? It can be really natural when we feel out of control to want to activate our upper brain to be like, okay, I'm going to problem solve this. I'm going to do all the things. Here we go. I've got this. When really our lower brain needs our support so that we can get our upper brain back online. Yeah. Identify what your brain needs and give it to your brain through the side door, right? So my brain is stressed, it needs feelings of safety. My brain is having a hard time holding multitudes, it needs experiences of finding that. Look for things you can control, name them, and orient advocacy to these things when applicable. Sometimes that may just be like, I can control what I'm having for breakfast. Look at me doing that, right? Other times it may be, I can control the way that I engage with this, political organization or this option of advocacy in my area. Holding multitudes, making sure that you're holding all of the truths or inviting yourself to see more than one anyway around your experience right now. Yeah. So saying like, I am just stressed and exhausted, totally valid, totally okay. And see if you can name other truths and look for moments where you feel the joy, where you feel the goodness. Yeah. Your brain is not oriented to do that. And so as we help kind of train our brain, that can really assist it in that process. Also, seek additional support. This is a great time to reach out for therapy, to be connected in other areas of support that you might need to take care of your body, to do the physio that you haven't been doing. Whatever it is that is the thing that you need, we are wired to manage and navigate in a shared system. So reach out for support. Things to not do: beat yourself up for how you're feeling. What you're feeling is super normal. And also, beating yourself up doesn't actually serve anything and can just make it worse. Don't try to just talk yourself out of what you're feeling without regulating. We just can't talk our lower brain into regulation, but there are other things we can do. And there are other things that your upper brain, if it's feeling motivated, can help guide your lower brain to. Make sure that you're not only talking politics and COVID with friends. So sometimes having a call or before a call saying, hey, I just want to like skip the whole, how are you doing with politics, COVID? Can we just talk about other stuff, right? It can be super nice. Don't forget that what you're feeling is super normal. Don't try to just seek the news for control or comfort. This is natural and you don't even know that we're doing it. It's so subconscious. But so knowing that it's like, if you find yourself doom scrolling, it's like, oh, wait, my brain's looking for answers that it's not going to find here. So like, what are the things that I can control and know right now? Right? Don't just get lost in Netflix or social media without checking in with yourself and seeing, what does my brain actually need right now? Is this actually doing this? Don't try to only drive with your logic brain, and don't be afraid to reach out for help. I hope that these different tools and resources have been really helpful. It's been a delight to be with all of you, and I hope to see you soon. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions or want to be in touch further, yesandbrain.com. I'm again, Lacy, Alana, and hope to see you soon. Have a good one. Bye-bye.